Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and I have here the Himalaya, which is Nicehck's new flagship. And typically when you hear the term flagship, you think kilobuck pricing, or at least I do. But as flagships go, this is a very reasonably priced IEM coming in at only $329. But I think it's on sale right now for $299, or at least at the time of this recording. And I know I say this all the time, but this $200 to $300 price range is extremely competitive right now, especially with the Chopin, the Origin, Falcon Ultra, EA1000 Fermat, and even more recently, the Pula PA02, which is pretty awesome, but it costs less than $200. So it's going to be interesting sharing how all of this played out during my testing and comparing. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. In the box of the IEMs and cable, it also comes with a nice case, lots of ear tips, and 3 sets of interchangeable tuning nozzles. And since the cable is modular, they've also included 3 different termination options: a 3.5 millimeter single-ended, 2.5 millimeter, and a 4.4 millimeter balanced termination. And finally, you get a purple magnetic cable tie and a cleaning tool. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, this is Nicehck's flagship IEM, and it's priced at $329. It has a single dual magnet, dual layer 10 millimeter dynamic driver, and that driver is housed in an all metal titanium alloy shell. So it feels nice. And while the shells do have a little bit of weight to them, they aren't so heavy as to cause any discomfort. They are, however, a little on the larger side, but they're shaped nicely as far as the curvature on the inside of the shell where it rests against my ears. My biggest issue is the nozzle length. It is just a tad short, so I'm not quite getting the insertion depth I would like to get. I was, however, still able to get a good seal with the SpinFit W1 ear tips. The design is simple, but it is really cool. They've definitely taken a more minimal approach to the design. They've kept the faceplate plain, with the exception of adding their branding using a very clean but small font on the front bottom edge. Some might find it maybe a little too plain, but I think it works, especially since the titanium alloy color already looks so great on its own. The cable also looks really nice as well. It flows well with the aesthetics of the shell design. It's pretty soft, it's easy to manage, although it does have a little bit of memory. It's not enough to cause any issues though. It's very easy to roll up, and I haven't had any major issues with tangling at all. It's a 2-pin cable, it's modular, so again, you can swap between a 3.5, 2.5, or 4.4 balanced termination, so that is really nice, although you are seeing that more and more at this price point. In general though, I feel like the build and design and the included accessories are on point. I just wish the nozzle was a little bit longer. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So just to set things up a little before we jump in, I think I just need to try and put this in perspective because of where it's priced, which is again $329. Because I always try to approach every review within the context of its price bracket, because that's how you, the consumer, approach it when you're preparing to hand over your hard-earned money. Now, right now, there are a lot of great IEMs under or around $200. We have the Chopin, the Pula PA02, Tantrum Origin EA1000 Fermat, Performer 5, Cara, Yume 2, and that's just to name a few, all of which either perform above their price point or are at least kind of competitive within that price bracket. So when I get an IEM that's priced at $300, then obviously my expectation is that it will have a solid tuning and have better technical performance than any of the aforementioned IEMs. Of course, I do take other things into consideration like build quality, design, etc., but I'm ultimately focused on its general sound performance relative to the rest of the market. So how does the Himalaya stack up? I guess that's the question. Well, let's talk about its tuning first, and then we'll get into its technicalities, and then we'll do some comparisons. So we've got 3 sets of tuning nozzles. However, the gold and gray nozzles sound almost identical. So really you only have 2 different tuning options to choose from. It came with the gray nozzles pre-installed. So the signature of the Himalaya with the gray and also the gold is going to be mostly warm neutral, and it's going to have a little more upper mid-range and treble energy than the blue nozzle. So basically, the gold and gray nozzles are more mid and treble forward, while the blue is more bass focused. But to be honest, I actually felt like the blue nozzle was a little more balanced. So that was the nozzle that attracted me, and I did most of my listening and testing with. That being said, if you do prefer a more mid-centric presentation, then you can opt for either the gray or gold. They both, again, they have a similar technicality, so ultimately it will just come down to your tuning preference. But to break things down a little bit further, starting with the bass, generally the bass quality is satisfying with any of the 3 nozzles, but I felt like the blue nozzle did the best job of balancing everything out. It also has good dynamics, good impact, and it's just, again, generally satisfying. It also has good extension, so you do have enough sub-bass presence to kind of reinforce the rest of the bass frequencies, and it also provides a reasonable amount of that sub-bass rumble, which is really nice. And then as you move into the mid-bass and lower mids, you have some extra mid-bass presence, so you are going to hear some warmth, and that will bring some richness and meatiness to its presentation. It's also going to give kick drums a little extra punch, but I do wish that transition from the bass into the mids was just a little more controlled, and there was just a little more separation between the bass and the lower mids, because I'm also getting just a little bit of bass bleed. It still works though. And again, the bass presentation as a whole is really nice, and again, definitely satisfying. The mid-range is where I seem to run into more issues as far as unnaturalness, and this was with all of the nozzles. Didn't matter which nozzle I was using. And when I was looking at the graphs on Squiglink, I did notice a little bit of a variance between about 2 or 2.5K and 4K. And I think that might be contributing to that unnaturalness. And I didn't notice it all the time. It seemed like it was mainly affecting vocals, but when I was listening to jazz, I didn't seem to notice it as much, but it's definitely noticeable when comparing it to, say, the Performer 8 or Falcon Ultra, both of those having very different upper mid tuning approaches, but both still sounding very natural. But despite that issue with the unnaturalness, vocals and instruments do have good energy, and they still maintain their center focus. Now, as far as mid-range detail, again, there is a little loss of resolution in the lower mids, but it does clean up quite nicely as you move into the upper mids and treble. Speaking of treble, as far as treble energy or quantity, it's just about right with the blue nozzle, but a little too forward for my taste with the gray or gold nozzle. Again, the blue nozzle sounds the most balanced to my ear. So cymbals and hi-hats are cutting through nicely and for the most part sound natural, but not perfectly natural. I would still say the Performer 8 and Falcon Ultra kind of dominate in that regard. It does have enough air in the upper treble though, which is pretty important to me. So that is, again, really nice, but I do feel like I'm missing some treble detail and micro detail for this price point. Not that the resolution is bad. There is enough detail to be had. It's just not necessarily that much better than, say, the Performer 5 or Origin, which cost less money. And it's definitely falling behind the Performer 8, Falcon Ultra, and even the Bravery AE. Granted, the Bravery AE is actually a pretty detailed IM, but that brings us to technicalities. So we know the detail is okay, but it could be better. It does have a decently wide soundstage for an IEM, and it also has pretty good forward depth and instrument layering along with good imaging. So it's fairly easy to place instruments within the sound field, and vocals have a decent center focus and image. So the positional cues are there. However, it could use just a little more focus, I think. Now, as far as comparisons and where I think the Himalaya stands in terms of the competition, its overall tuning is actually pretty good, but there are, again, some issues with unnaturalness in the upper mids. Now, its bass quality is, again, very satisfying, and while it's not the most controlled bass, it's still clean for this tuning approach. And even its technical performance is decent, but it's not very competitive in terms of detail levels. So it's kind of a mixed bag for me, I guess. And the bottom line is, for me, that when I'm comparing this with all of my other IMs that cost less, like the Falcon Ultra, Performer 5, Chopin, Origin, EA1000 Fermat, Bravery AE, and even the newer Pula PA02, which only cost $165, by the way, that's about where I feel like this is landing as far as its overall sonic performance. I know the Performer 8 is a little more expensive, but it's also giving me near Studio 4 level performance, so it's performing above its price point. And the Himalaya, well, it's not, in my opinion. So because of where they priced the Himalaya, it kind of puts it in a tight spot because there are so many great IEMs at 200 or in the low 200s. All that said, it does sound good. The bass quality is quite good for this price point. It also has an excellent design, really good build quality, and it is nicely accessorized. So that concludes my review of the Nicehck Himalaya. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.